Hello and welcome to the Power of Passive Investing. We have an amazing guest today, Chad Gallagher. Chad is a real estate investor, but not just real estate investor. He has a few amazing strategies under his belt that he's going to share with us. But let's start by welcoming Chad. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Excited to have you. Let's start by you sharing your bio with our listeners.
Yeah, sure. Uh, kind of an interesting little background. I actually spent about 10 years in tech. I was working in digital advertising, traveling all over the country, even internationally. For about 5 of those years, I basically started and was kind of running the smartphone and tablet advertising division of our company. At the time, ads on smartphones were just getting started, and so it was a great place to be. I learned a lot, and one lesson I learned was you sure want to have equity in things that you're involved in. As part of that journey, I actually negotiated the sale, or part of a team that negotiated the sale of my company to Verizon, which was a huge sale, probably a $5 billion transaction. And yet, everybody else on the team with me had tremendous equity in the company. So they all retired, basically, or were about to retire, except for me, because I didn't have much equity. And so that was a good lesson to learn that that equity does matter. And so then I started a property management company. I started to invest in real estate. We were targeting, basically, we would go to a tax sale and we would buy homes that nobody wanted to live in, rough C minus class housing. But we were buying these things in 2013, 14, 15, 16 at a time when we were getting them for really, really attractive pricing. And so we knew if we could figure out how to manage these tough properties, we knew the long-term upside would be there. Um, you know, I think so much about investing is about figuring out where maybe you have a bit of a competitive advantage or creating a competitive advantage. And so for us, by building out the management company and kind of becoming best in, as good as you can possibly be at managing these kind of tough properties, not just for ourselves, but for other people too, we felt like it kind of gave us an advantage to do a good job of managing these assets. It sure isn't the most fun thing in the world to be managing. I mean,
Of
these are
course.
rough properties. These are properties where there's drug trade going on. They're definitely not safe at night. When people say, give us the blueprint of where to invest, they basically say a bunch of things, and all the things they say are the opposite of where we were investing.
Yeah, sounds
You
like.
know, make sure the houses across the street aren't boarded up. All the homes were boarded up across the street. Make sure there's not drug violence. There was always drug violence. It was all these things that you don't really want. But I mean, we would buy a duplex for $20,000. A property that today is worth probably $160,000. And so we always knew if we could hang in there and stabilize the assets, um, it might not be the funnest thing in the world, but good things would come. And so
Sure.
we did that, and it worked. We eventually built the property management company to manage 5,000 properties,
Wow.
scatter site. So we were like the largest scatter site manager in the mid-Atlantic of the United States. And it was tough. It was stressful. It wasn't easy. And then our properties all did tremendously well. We still own many of them. We are selling some of them now because they have appreciated a lot. And then when we sold the management company, which was like 2021, I guess, right
Hmm.
around there, we we started to think about where are we going next in our life? What's our next kind of thing we want to do? And so there was a few things that we've kind of always been passionate about, but on the investing side, we started to see that uh, obviously apartments and single family homes have increased in value tremendously, and that's
Of
not new to
course.
anybody.
Yeah.
And so we started to think, where is there still opportunity in terms of investing? And one place that we really believe in, and I still believe in today, is what I call iconic and timeless properties. And so that, that takes on lots of different sizes and shapes and flavors. And usually these things they're the exact opposite from C minus apartments.
Right.
They are complicated. They are usually high acreage. They usually are sit on some very scenic real estate. And then there's a couple different kind of avenues you can go with these things. Sometimes they're short-term rentals. Sometimes they are more more of the kind of hospitality, hotels and restaurants and stuff like that. But so that's kind of that's what kind of piqued our interest. And so my business partner and I, we bought two properties in 2021. And then last year we bought another one. And we have another one under contract here this year. So, and each
Excellent.
one some we do ourselves, some the last couple we partnered with Josh McCallan and his team at Viva May, who have experts in hospitality. But and so that's kind of where we're headed to. And yes, it's been a wild ride.
It's amazing, Chad. What I like in your story in particular is the contrast, how you went from one end of the spectrum, working on rough properties, rough neighborhoods, all the bad things that can happen were happening in those neighborhoods, to something on a completely opposite end of the
Yeah.
spectrum, high end, maybe even affluent area, something that fewer people would touch because of the higher barrier to entry and because it's so unique in management, it's management intensive, and because it's um, so different from those apartments that you were managing as a property manager. But before we get into hospitality, I want our listeners to hear more about your negotiation story and how you were able to improve on your negotiation skills. Um, you said that, and we all learn from our own mistakes. We know that from ourselves, and we know that from teaching our kids. I'm sure you can relate, and I can relate. Like, I'm trying to teach my kids the failures that I made, and they don't listen. They want to make their own mistakes. Fine, it's okay. One day you'll thank me, but I'll wait till that day happen. But in the meantime, let's start with that experience where you didn't have the equity, and how did that experience shaped you into what you are today, and how you worked on improving your negotiation skills?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough, about maybe 14 years ago, I was growing in the tech company I was in, and they gave me some training. Two people in particular, really, I'll never forget. One was someone who actually did peace negotiating in the Middle East.
Wow, of
So obviously, very complicated, high stress negotiating.
course.
And then the other person was actually the chief revenue officer of Google for about 5 years when they were really growing. And so two, wildly different people, but um, and they each had their own style, but what they really imparted on me was, the most fundamental, when people think about negotiating, they always think about, I think in someone's head they think, how do I get a lower price for what I want to buy, right?
Mm-hmm.
They think, someone offers me a price for $100, and how do I get it for $95? That's negotiating.
Yeah.
And I, you know, I some of my best negotiations ever have had nothing to do with price at all. In fact, many times when I negotiate with people, I won't even talk about price for a while. And when we do, it oftentimes is not the most important thing for me in the negotiation. And so, what I've really learned is, the to be a great negotiator is and it sounds cliche, but it's really all about listening. And it's really just shutting up and really trying to understand what is going on. And I'll say, by nature, my wife will tell you, I'm not sure I'm the best listener in the whole world. I do talk a lot, and I'm often leading teams, but when I get into a negotiation for something that I realize is going to be complicated, I am the most attuned listener you've ever seen in your life. And when I say listen, I mean I'm not just saying what words are being said, but really catching the person, how they're saying it, who are they looking at when they're saying different things, if there's different people involved, seeing how they interact, who's ultimately the one making the decision, and most important of all is what actually matters to the other person. Um, a couple stories come to mind. The I negotiated for this high end winery recently, and when we did that negotiation, um, it was extremely clear to me within minutes that price was actually not what was most important to the seller. And I could probably spend a half hour talking negotiation, but the thing that's most interesting of that negotiation was we were $500,000 less in our bid for the property, and we actually still were chosen to be the buyer of it. And the other team negotiating had no clue what was going on. They assumed price was the driver and hadn't done the kind of necessary homework to figure out what was actually going on and what was important to them. In this case, what was important to the seller was two things. One was honoring their legacy, which was this property, and then the second was closing quickly. And so we all parts of our negotiation and offer and structure accentuated those two things. And ultimately we were chosen. And and so I thought that was telling in that can you imagine you go back to your manager, you're the negotiating party on the other team, and you tell them, we weren't chosen. And the guy says, oh, how much were we under the bid? And you have to tell your manager, no, we were the higher bid by 500,000 and we weren't chosen. I mean,
Incredible.
that's hard to stomach, right? And so that's what happened. And so I think and then in another case, on another negotiation we did recently, um, I pretty much went with the price the seller wanted to sell at. And I spent a lot of time negotiating some other parts of the deal, in this case, seller financing, which made the
Excellent.
deal incrementally more interesting to us.
Cool.
Um, and so, I just think that things are complicated. The last story I'll tell on this topic here is when I was in technology, which is where I think I really learned the most about the art of negotiating. And I've since used that in real estate. Um, when I was kind of part of this team that was selling our company into this other tech company, into Verizon. We started out the negotiating. Actually, it was going to be a partnership. They had no interest in acquiring. They weren't even thinking about acquiring the company.
Mm.
And we did such a great job and of really just the first couple of days, all we did was learn about all the complexities that Verizon has to offer and what are they trying to accomplish in the coming years. And then spent the back half of the week showing them how these assets could kind of intertwine very well with the core assets and core goals of Verizon. And by the end of the week, the team was so convinced that it ultimately led to an acquisition. And so I mean, the lesson there is just, I think that negotiating is way more complicated and way more intellectual than people think. I think people think of the used car salesman,
Right.
um, but especially when assets get larger or more complicated or unique, and you're dealing with a seller, I think negotiating is critical and is really fun. It's like the most fun thing I do. And then, by the way, the last piece on this is, this isn't just about negotiating real estate. I've negotiated multiple businesses, and negotiating businesses is really the same. It's all the same concept. Whether you're trying to buy the business or sell the business, we've acquired businesses when the person wasn't looking to sell, and after
The best
spending weeks
time.
together, yeah, they eventually realized that selling would make a lot of sense to them. So I think yeah, it's a fun trait, and I would encourage people to really think about it and also think about who on their team, if they're on a team, who on their team is doing the negotiating, because I think there's a huge, if you get the right person in the right role with the right other person, it can lead to really great results.
Agreed, agreed. This was a ton of valuable information, Chad. Thanks for sharing. So, for our listeners who want to learn more about negotiating techniques, I personally would recommend reading Chris's was Never Split the Difference. It's one of the great books. It's definitely not the only one. There are multiple books. There are a ton of books on negotiation, of course. Maybe Chad will take the time and write one as well down the road. We'll read his book on negotiation as well. But
Yeah,
for
Chris's book is great, by the way. It's a great starting point for sure.
yeah, definitely. But now, Chad, do you think it matters? And maybe you can go back to your experience with this hospitality trade place that you negotiated. Do you think it matters whether you negotiating in communications directly with the owner or through the broker? Like the fact that you learned that for the owner, it was more important to keep their legacy. Then get that extra 500. Did you learn that directly from the owner, or was the broker in between the two of you?
Yeah, so it's funny. The broker was involved. Now we very much have the broker to thank. So we always believe in meeting the owner.
Great.
Ideally, you're negotiating directly with an owner, no broker involved.
Yep.
But
Yep.
as we all know, sometimes that might not be possible. In this case, this will go down as I think the best negotiation I've ever done because we had a broker, and the broker actually said to us up front, um, the owners are not interested in any kind of seller financing on this property, which it's not a necessity, but in properties that need to be turned around, and in particular when the seller has a high net worth, it makes it so much easier for the buyer if the seller will hold some money back because it just leads to an easier transaction. That getting bank lending on a property that's in distress is tough.
Yep.
And so if a seller can hold back some money, and if they're a high net worth individual, they don't need the money tomorrow anyway. So it's kind of a no brainer. But anyway, he told us up front they're not interested. Don't even ask. And he was a bit even argumentative. And I was worried that this was going to be a really tough negotiating. But when we met the owner, we spent all day with him. And by the end of the day, the broker had actually walked away. And the one guy who I had actually gotten to know, the owner, um, I felt like I had built enough rapport with him to feel comfortable asking him, even though I was told not to ask. And so it was a gamble, but I asked him, and the way I phrased it was, look, the way this deal is structured, it seems like it would make a ton of sense for us to actually, essentially pay you interest on some part of this price.
Mm-hmm.
It'll allow us to make this deal happen faster. I knew that was important to him, and ultimately allow us to put together a better offer for you. And within seconds, he said, makes complete sense to me, Chad. Give us an offer, and I'm sure we'd be open to that. So
Amazing.
that's part one, is that you had a broker tell us not on the table, and 48 hours later, you had someone essentially say, okay. But what's interesting was you'd think, okay, you're not throw out the broker's opinion and go directly to the seller. But actually, in that case, that would have been a mistake too, because the broker is still going to be involved here. They're still a trusted part of this process.
Of course.
And kind of fast forward a few weeks, they did get another offer that came in, and it was higher. And so at that point, I really had to convince the broker that we were more likely to close. And so, I went from first spending all my time with the seller but while I was doing that, we were still keeping the broker engaged and making sure we respected the broker.
Of
We weren't
course.
trying to, and all we want to do is get a deal that closes. And so, every day I was talking to the broker, tons of updates of what we were doing. And, long story short is the broker in the end is the one who convinced the seller to go with us. And so, I guess the point of this is, yes, you always want to work with the seller, but there's times when you got to go through a broker. And I think even when you're going through a broker, one, it doesn't mean you can't meet the seller. So you can still meet the seller and you still gain a lot there. And then, in that case, you're negotiating with two parties. And here's the sad part. Both parties have wildly different goals, usually.
Right. Usually.
For the broker, price point is definitely not usually. their number one goal. Sometimes it is, but usually they have other goals. In this case, the guy just wanted to close.
Of
That's
course.
all. That's all the broker cared about. And so we just hammered the broker over the head that we would actually close, and we're able to actually use him as part of our overall negotiating, as almost negotiating on our behalf to the owner, which played out. And to this day, we have a tremendous relationship with that broker. So I think these things, they come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
Obviously, whenever possible, you want to meet the end person, but so often there's not just one person involved. There's oftentimes more people, and you really just have to slow down and understand, you know, each person's motivation. What are they trying to get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
And then engage with them, oftentimes one on one, to show how you can help them achieve their own goals through this process.
Absolutely. No, I love it. So share with our listeners a couple of lessons learned from your experience as a property management owner and as someone who managed the properties in the rougher neighborhoods. What have you learned and why have you decided to step away from that role and from dealing with these areas?
Yeah, I mean, the first lesson for sure is that it's a no-win situation. I mean, it is really tough. I mean, managing C-class real estate is so tricky. And it's tricky because you're sitting between a tenant, oftentimes the city or township who has their own goals, an
Mm-hmm.
owner, and a contractor. And each of these people have different motivations and goals.
Right.
And so it is oftentimes a no-win situation. Um, I say this now that I don't own a property management company. I really do think it's a fair statement, which is, um, owners are oftentimes too hard on property managers. When I often find that when an investor makes an investment that does great, the investor says, I made a great investment. When the investment doesn't go great, they often say the property manager screwed up the investment.
They want to blame someone for it, of course.
Yes. And so, you know, you could do, the property manager could do 49 things correct, but that 50th thing or something, a decision they made or something they did doesn't turn out right, then gets kind of held against them, which isn't fair. I mean, well, there's no question there's good and bad property management, but there's also just a lot of making decisions that are sometimes gray. A tenant applies and it's a gray area of, do I accept this tenant or not? And oftentimes it's a judgment call, and you're playing the odds, and sometimes the odds are going to be in your favor, and sometimes they weren't. And so I would encourage investors to, I guess, as a starting point, it's understand that property management is not a perfection business. It is a business where you're trying to win over the long term, and you're making lots of decisions. And I think that if you kind of keep that in mind, uh, that it'll help to understand, number one, and then number two is setting realistic expectations for the asset that's being managed. I mean, so often, um, I'll give you an example. We were managing a 20 unit building, what I'd call like C plus kind of housing, and for like 2 years we didn't have a single day of vacancy on this property. Like, it's
Incredible.
incredible, right?
That's impressive. Yeah, very
Right.
impressive.
And the owner had didn't the owner this is all the owner owned. And I get a call from the owner and he says, Chad, what the heck is going on over there? And I said, oh, I haven't talked to you in 2 years. Last time I saw you, you were just buying this. What do you mean? He says, well, there's two vacant units in my property. And I said, oh, what's the story? He says, well, they moved out like 3 weeks ago and they're still not filled. And I said, okay, well, are we trying to fill them? Yes, you're trying to fill them, but you know, it, it's been a couple of weeks. And I said, well, how have we been doing overall? And he says, oh, well, these are the first days of vacancy in 2 years, right? And so the point of that story is, in his head, right, all he had seen was this 20-unit building. He had no days of vacancy. Now there's a couple of days of vacancy. And it feels like the management company is completely fallen apart.
Right.
Um, in the grand spectrum, we had actually done like extra credit good, right? A plus plus plus. Um, but now, a normal thing, which is vacancy, is kind of seen as not doing well. And so, I think it's just having realistic expectations for a property. Number one, prime management companies and prime managers, whether you do it yourself or you work with someone, it's not an exact science. You're making a bunch of judgment calls on things. There's obviously good and bad property management companies, whether you do it yourself or work with someone. But I think that, having some empathy for a property manager that, they're oftentimes sitting between some really competing forces here, and it can be a thankless job. And I think that the owners, here's the point I'll end on. I think this is a really good comment. The owners who showed empathy to the property managers, for better or worse, those owners actually got better service from the property managers. And that's not how it should be necessarily. That's not how we designed the company. But the owner who's always coming at the property manager and screaming and yelling, the reality is no one wants to work with that person. And and ultimately it actually dissolves communication, which is one of the most important things in any kind of relationship, but for sure in terms of property management. So our owners who really got it, who did great, they had a lot of empathy for our team, and then therefore the team really wanted to fight for them and do great for their assets, and they always had the best results of anyone.
Chad, I think it's a huge tip for those property owners that are either looking to work with property managers or working already. And it actually applies to any business relationship. If you show your empathy, you're working with other humans. So show that you're empathetic and you understand the business. In the example of the owner, the 20-unit owner, where the building had no vacancies for 2 years, had he called you during those 2 years a few times and said how great of a job you're doing, and then called to complain 3 weeks after, it wouldn't have been taken with the same
That's right.
way. Has he been treating you differently and shown some appreciation for the
That's
first 3 years when
that's
you did
right.
a fantastic job?
That's
So
right.
that's totally understandable, and I completely agree with your point that it's a matter of understanding the property manager job, and it's also a matter of understanding that it's your choice as the property owner. If you want to self-manage, you want to put the efforts and get the results yourself, by all means. But if you want to take away that time and pay a little extra for it to somebody else, then you have to trust the person you're working with. And as the saying goes, trust but verify. Stay in constant communication with the property managers, regardless whether they're doing good or bad job. Communicate consistently, not once in a blue moon, only when they're doing a bad job. It's like
100%.
it's like dealing with students. If you have students, you talk to them on a regular basis, not only when they're doing bad in school. So same applies here as well. So very much relatable to that point. And then I wanted our listeners to hear a little bit about your new hospitality experience. Share with us, how did you decide on entering into the hospitality space? And is it because it's as challenging as the property manager and it has high
Yeah.
barriers to entry?
Well, look, I am a sucker for a challenge. There's no question about that, Elena.
Right.
You've pointed that out well, and
Yep.
you're correct. But I think, look, I think much of investing is all about where can you find leverage,
Yep.
where can you kind of have a competitive advantage, maybe in the space. And so for years it was kind of the C-class housing, and what happened was when those assets really increased in price, we started to look around and say, what is out there maybe that we could create some leverage against, that maybe we don't think is overpriced, at least the way we invest. And the way we invest is very different. We invest with a 10, 15, 20-year horizon. So when I buy a property, I hope to own it between 10 and 20 years or more.
Sure.
Um, which is, by the way, and none of this is advice meant to be, I mean, look, people make tons of money flipping homes, and obviously they
Yep.
don't more than 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months, but um, I, if that's what we believe in, Then we can start looking at asset prices and say, what do we believe is a fair price to pay for something that we want to own in 10 or 15 years? And the answer to that started to become some of these properties that are what we call timeless or iconic. These are usually higher acreage type properties. They're usually scenic in some way, shape, or form. They're usually very complicated. Uh, uh, and by the way, they're for better or worse, they're usually not cheap, right? And they're very hard to finance. And so we started to say, all of these challenges that come with it, a property that you really see the value if you hold it for a long period of time. You're going to need a great track record and be able to cobble together financing. We're capable of doing that, and be up for the challenge of whether it be hospitality or even a short-term rental. It leads to a complicated management structure of the asset. And we said, look, I think we can figure all those things out. So um, my business partner and I, we've acquired 3 of these in some way, shape, or form. We're under contract for our 4th. And one thing I believe in is trying to go after something for a long period of time. And so in this case, our ambitions are over the next 5, 10 years to acquire 5, 10, 15, 30, I don't know, a bunch of these types of properties. And so we are interested in them. And we've learned a lot. They're for sure not simple, and they're not for the faint of heart. I mean, the risk profile is higher. They're complicated. They're not easy. But on the flip side, you're able to own, imagine I'll give you an example of a 5-acre property with half a mile waterfront sitting on the open Chesapeake Bay as a
Mm-hmm.
short-term rental. Um, that's a piece of property I sure want to own in 10 to 20 years. A
Yeah.
different property we just bought is a 400-acre farm that on one edge is a highway, on the other edge is a mile and a half of waterfront, a restaurant, a bunch of rooms, a bunch of wedding venues, a beachfront bar, a winery. Again, complicated, but man, that's the kind of thing I want to own in 10 to 20 years. And one of the things I go back to is basic economics. On the supply and demand side, the supply of these properties by nature is getting lower because
Right.
properties are getting developed. And you basically can't build on the waterfront like this.
True.
Contrast that to apartments, which, and I'm not knocking apartments as an investment, but people can build new apartments all the time. So the supply of apartments can actually increase with demand, whereas these properties supply can't increase. And so that does make me think, man, the value of these assets is going to go up over time. And then the challenge becomes, can you create sustainable revenue models against the real estate? And so that's what we're spending all our time thinking about. It's been wildly fascinating. Some we've done ourselves, some we've done in partnership with others. My wife operates one of our properties. So we bring in different people. And by the way, the operating plan for each is different. So once we
Sure.
find the asset, then we figure out what are the businesses we want to operate on it. And it's just not like an apartment where you just go rent it out long term. The businesses are by nature different and complicated. I'll give you a wild example. I just spent over the weekend. I was out playing. I built a frisbee golf course on one of our properties, which is like wild. I mean, that doesn't even make any
Yeah,
sense to
sure.
most real resters.
Yeah.
But for that property, that was an asset that we felt like we could add that would increase the value of the property and complement some other businesses in the property.
Mm-hmm.
So these are hands-on assets that we don't do a lot of them. You might do one in a year and spend a whole bunch of time building it out. But what's starting to happen now is, and to your listeners, I would encourage if you happen to have an asset that you want us to look at, we are looking at more of these now because we're becoming the people who buy them. And on the investor side, we're having folks join us on some of these investments because they're big projects that do require a bunch of private capital in them. And so yeah, it's been wildly interesting.
Amazing. Love it. It sounds like a great experience, and you sound like a continuous learner, someone who loves the obstacles and finds ways to overcome them, and not only do that, but also bring value to other people by bringing investor partners along with you for the ride and showing them how it's done, which is great.
Yeah, I think so. I'll just, it's interesting. I mean, working with partners, just about every venture I've ever done, well, maybe every venture I've ever done has had a partner in one way, shape, or form. Um, Even the one that just my wife and I own, my wife actually operates it, and she's my partner on that one. So I am a big proponent of going at life with teams and finding people who can complement you. It takes a lot of the risk off the asset, I believe. It allows you to share in the leadership and guidance of it, and then as these assets grow, for people to have upside in the long term and to bring all sorts of interesting perspectives to it, it's a home run.
100%. Chad, I call it SWOT analysis. I went to a business school and always like to meet with other people and see who has the strength in the areas where I have weaknesses, and that always helps you to create the better partnerships in general. As we're wrapping up our interview, which has been absolutely incredible, we always ask our interviewers two questions. Number one is, how do you like to give back?
Yeah, so for me, how I get back is I host a whole bunch of different real estate events. Some are monthly under the Real Estate Hackers brand, um, which you can find out those about those on realestatehackers.com. You can also follow me on Facebook or on different channels on Real Estate Hackers. And I just do an insane amount of helping investors. And by the way, it's free. I don't have a coaching program. I don't charge for a mastermind. I have found that we really like this model, which is we host a bunch of events, and we just try to help other investors. And with that, look, good things come to us. And there was a point 10 years ago where I knew nothing about real estate, and I was lucky enough to kind of sit in on some other people's events, and that's where I learned real estate. And so it felt only fitting to kind of give back through a similar method. And yeah, it's actually probably the most fun thing I do.
Love it, Chad. Love it. And on that note, we used to have a ton of in-person events pre-COVID, and I'm actually going back to that this coming Thursday. We're having our first ever in-person event here in Northern New Jersey. So for anyone local into the area, always welcome to join us. But that I think that's an amazing way to give back to people and not charge them, and kind of see how that may potentially come into fruition through the partnership, or for you to see how that person is growing up in the real estate investing arena. It always helps to see other people grow, people that you mentored in the past. So it's amazing
Totally, totally.
perspective. And the second and last question is, which you kind of answered already partially, is how can our audience find you? I'm assuming it's through realestatehackers.com.
Yeah, I'll give you my emails. My email's chad@realestatehackers.com. And yeah, we can follow. I'm on Facebook just as Chad Gallagher, but other mediums, Instagram and YouTube as Real Estate Hackers. And yeah, I get emails from all sorts of people asking all sorts of crazy things. And we really try to do our best to connect people, help people. People are now starting to bring interesting deals to us that are in this kind of timeless, iconic category. And some people invest with us, which is great. But other people are just looking for help. And we try to do our best to connect someone or guide someone in a direction that would be helpful to them.
Chad, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you for the interview. And for our audience, if you're looking to connect with Chad, find him on realestatehackers.com or on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. Thank you. And until next time, goodbye.
Thanks, Elena.